the night sky in 2049 was torn open by a red crack, and a low mechanical beach reeled over the city. Luo Yun stood on the broken street, looking at the hundreds of giant towers rising from the far side, each of which was like a black blade piercing the sky, emitting strange blue light. He looked down at his wrist, and the virtual interface appeared: Level 0, ID, Ender, Reset. The memory flashed like fragments. He was once the top 10 tower war masters in the world. Now he has been ruthlessly zeroed by the system, and along with the past of that group, it seems to be deliberately erased. The ending: it's been a long time. A cold electronic voice sounded from the ears, carrying a teasing. Luo Yun turned suddenly, only seeing the empty street. The voice continued, "I am Zero, your system helps the spirit. Congratulations on being chosen as System Core Selector. From now on, you will shoulder the mission of the Tower of Reinforcement, or, to be its end." Luo Yun had his eyebrows tightly locked, and he tried to recall the source of this sound, but there was only a blur in his brain. What is the picker? I'm just a reset number, I've lost the equipment. Are you looking for a wrong person? He snorted coldly, his words full of self-deprecation. In that battle that year, one of his mistakes caused the entire team to be overthrown, and the roars of teammates and the system's death prompts are still lying around his ears. He left the game for a whole year. He thought he could escape everything, but he didn't expect that he would actually merge with the game tonight and drag him into this uneven purity again. Looking for a wrong person? No, Luo Yun, your database knows you better than you yourself. Lingling's voice smiled. Look at your surroundings, this world is no longer the reality you know. 100 towers, millions of players, and the system modules that are collapsing. Do you think you can stay out of it? Around the Luo Yun ring, the street lights flickered in dark, screaming and explosions came from far away. The cracks in the sky continued to expand, and the scene inside the tower was visible: the twisted forest, the floating mechanical castle, and even the shadow of players fighting with monsters. He clenched his fists tightly, and a feeling of indescribable pressure surged into his chest. The game became reality, and he, from the peak to the bottom, did not have any equipment for first-class novices. Okay, let me believe you. Luo Yun took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. What is the candidate? What is my mission? In simple terms, the main AI of the Tower War system, Viewer Omega, was split due to unknown data intrusion. The current tower rules are in chaos, and the player's death is no longer just rebirth, but will lose memory and even affect the real consciousness. Zero's voice became severe. You are the only selected maintenance weight, and have the right to short-term modification of the rules in the tower. But be careful, every use will have a price, maybe your memory or your teammate. Luo Yun was stunned for a moment, and his brain flashed past the faces of his teammates. After that group, he never contacted anyone again, and didn't even know if they were still alive. Captains. He murmured in a low voice, immediately slamming his head. I don't need teammates, nor do I need any permission. I just want to figure out why this happens. Oh? You can't help it. A cunning sound appeared in Lingling's voice. Look at your interface, the novice mission has been activated. Target, enter the first tower and complete the entry trial. Prize, basic equipment and level improvement. Failed to apply for the price. Haha, believe me, you won't want to know. Luo Yun looked down and saw that there was indeed a line of blood-red tip on the virtual interface on his wrist. Task countdown, 23 hours 59 minutes. He clenched his teeth, stomped his heart for a moment, and finally opened his pace and walked towards the nearest tower. Whether he wants to or not, the system has set him in this game, and the only thing he can do is to uncover the truth step by step or to go deeper again. At the entrance of the tower, the cold metal door was filled with strange runes, and dozens of players gathered in front of the door, some panic, and some were full of faces. Luo Yun stood outside the crowd and observed silently. He noticed several higher-level players teaming up, discussing monsters and traps in the tower in a low voice, while the novice was chaotic like a headless slut, knowing nothing he was about to face. Hey, the zero-level devil there, a middle-aged man in heavy armor walked over, full of disdain, looking at your shady body. You should be a bad guy who was just reset, right? Do you want to form a team with us? Although the first level is simple, for you, you may still be dead. Luo Yun glanced at him, and the other party's ID was displayed on the interface, Iron Wall, LV-15. He smiled coldly and said with a head, "Thank you, but I'm a person." That year, he was also a top player who was looked up to by countless novices. Now he has fallen to the point of being let go by others. This humiliation has ignited a group of unnamed fire in his heart. Ha, stubborn. The Iron Wall blew his shoulders and turned away. Don't blame me for not reminding you that the tower is not a place where you can fight alone. Luo Yun ignored him and walked straight towards the tower door. When his hands touched the cold metal, a biting chill came into his body, and the system's prompt sound was raised around his ears. Welcome to enter the Tower of Reboot, the first level, Trial Forest. Survival goal, kill 10 low-level demon wolves. Note, death will deduct some memory and restart the level. The door opened slowly, and the dense fog came over, and the howling of the wolf in the deep forest could be seen. Luo Yun took a deep breath, held the broken iron scraps sent by the system, and stepped into this unknown area. Whether it is the system's slander or the past slam, he must face it, because this time, he has no way out. Outside the tower, 00's voice sounded again and said in a low voice, "Luo Yun, your trial has just begun. Remember, every step of the choice may determine the fate of the entire tower, and your own." The dense fog swayed Luo Yun's ankles, and a damp and decayed breath was filled with the air of the forest. He held the broken iron sword in his hand tightly, and the blade was filled with a gap, and even a piece of silk strip was stained, as if it might break at any time. The soil under the feet was soft and slippery, and every step he took could hear the slight squeaking sound, as if something was watching him in the dark. In the deep forest, a low wolf howl came, and the sound was long and close, making it difficult to tell the direction. Lingling, is this crack really the equipment provided by the system? Or did you just come from the garbage dump? Luo Yun complained in a low voice, his eyes sending around, trying to capture any swearing movements. His language is filled with discomfort, but he is more vigilant about this strange environment. Back then, he had killed countless high-level bosses with top-level artifacts, but now he doesn't have a single weapon like that. This gap made him feel intimately painful. "Oh, Lord Ender, don't be so picky." 00's electronic voice sounded from his ears, and he was teasing in his language, "This is the newbie's benefit that the system has carefully prepared for you. Although it looks a bit short, it can at least cut the fur of the low-level demon wolf. Of course, the premise is that you don't get bitten to death by them first." Luo Yun snorted coldly and ignored Lingling's ridicule. He squatted down and gently swept the bushes in front of him, revealing a piece of trampled mud, with several marks of wolf claws clearly printed on it. The scars are very new and the soil is not completely dry yet, indicating that the demon wolf is nearby. He closed his eyes, held his breath, and tried to recall the feeling of fighting that year, the intuition that moved the enemy to control his heart, as if he had been engraved into his bone marrow. However, there is only a blank space in the sea of brain, and the fragments of memory are like scattered pieces, which are incomplete. Level 0, there is no skill. Luo Yun bit his teeth tightly and his hand holding the sword shook slightly. He knew that now he was just an empty shell with experience, and even the most basic fighting instincts needed to be awakened again. But time doesn't wait for anyone, and the virtual interface on the wrist is ruthlessly counting, task counting, 23 hours and 47 minutes. Suddenly, a slight rustling sound came from the bushes on the left, breaking the silence of the forest. Luo Yun suddenly opened his eyes, his body instinctively flashed from the side. At almost the same moment, a black shadow swept out from the bush, and his sharp claws swept through the air, bringing a fishy wind. He looked closely and saw that it was a low-level demon wolf, with a slightly larger body shape than an ordinary wild wolf, with gray-black hair, angry light in his eyes, and fishy saliva dripping from his mouth. "It's just right," Luo Yun murmured in a low voice, and a sneer came out of the corner of his mouth. He quickly adjusted his posture, and his feet were rooted in the ground, slanting the iron blade, shaking a defensive frame. Although the equipment was broken and the memory was short, the rhythm of the battle seemed to have never left his body. That is the instinct engraved in the muscles, the straightforward feeling cultivated in countless life and death battles. The demon wolf growled, and his back legs suddenly exerted force, and he rushed over again. Luo Yun's eyes flashed, and he avoided his claws and attacked his side. At the same time, the iron blade rolled out an arc from bottom to top, piercing the demon wolf's abdomen. Although the sword blade is clumsy, his shooting angle is extremely tricky, accurately avoiding the demon wolf's bones and stabbing into the soft flesh. The blood spurted out, and the demon wolf let out a silent howl and stumbled back a few steps, leaving a deep bone-like wound on his abdomen. The first hit is barely qualified. Luo Yun gasped and looked down at the blood on the blade, his face still not relaxed. He could feel that although this sword hit, its strength was far away. If it were changed to himself that year, this blow would have already turned the demon wolf into 2.5. Now, his arms were numb, and the weight of the iron was a bit difficult for him now. Before he could breathe, there were a few more low growls from deep in the forest, and the bushes swayed one after another. The 3 demon wolves simultaneously rushed out from different directions and surrounded their group. Their eyes were filled with bloodthirsty light, and their mouths were filled with threatening low birds, which were obviously attracted by the bloody smell of their companions. Luo Yun looked around and quickly judged his situation. The terrain was unfavorable and the number of enemies was excellent, but he did not have a single recovery prop. "Finisher, it seems you have to be serious." Zero's voice sounded again, carrying a happy surprise. "These guys won't show mercy just because you are at 0. Do you want to consider using your rules right to modify your rules? Just a small price can make them instantly turn into little sheep. Add token?" Luo Yun bit his teeth and said, warning before the flash of 0 in the brain, every right to use may lose memory and even affect real consciousness. He didn't know how much memory he had left to lose, nor did he know if the erased past were still possible to recover. "No, I haven't fallen to the point where I need to cheat on the system." He raised his head suddenly, his eyes locked at the nearest demon wolf, and his feet suddenly accelerated, and the iron sword pointed directly at the other party's throat. This time when the sound of flash was as fast as a flash, the demon wolf did not react at all. The tip of the sword accurately pierced its neck, bringing out a bunch of blood. However, almost at the same moment, another demon wolf rushed from the side, and his sharp claws grabbed him hard on the back. Luo Yun couldn't hide, so he could only carry this blow with his shoulder. His paws tore his clothes, leaving 3 deep red blood marks on his skin, and the pain made him hum, and he stumbled down his foot and fell down a little. The blood dripped down his arms, dyeing the soil, and the remaining 2 demon wolves seemed to smell the weakness, and a flash of excitement flashed in their eyes, and at the same time launched an attack. "Don't die!" Luo Yun bit his teeth tightly, holding his standing sturdy figure, and his eyes swept quickly between the 2 demon wolves. He knew that his current physical strength was limited, and if he continued to drag it on, he would only be exhausted. "You have to fight quickly, even if you pay some price." He suddenly inserted the iron sword into the ground, held the handle with both hands, and roared, forcibly lifted his body to avoid the devil wolf's snatch. At the same time, his eyes were locked on the back legs of one of the demon wolves. There was a clear old injury, and his actions were slightly slower than other companions. Luo Yun's eyes flashed with a cold light, and he suddenly pulled out the iron blade and headed towards the demon wolf's back legs with all his strength. The blade drew a sharp sound of a sharp sword, and the demon wolf seemed to have realized the danger and tried to twist and dodge. However, Luo Yun's speed was faster. As soon as the sword light flashed, the blood sprayed out. The demon wolf let out a silent howl, and its hind legs were slammed and fell heavily to the ground. But at this moment, another demon wolf grabbed the gap and slapped towards Luo Yun's chest, with sharp teeth pointing straight to his heart. Luo Yun's pupils suddenly shrank, and he could not react at all. He could only instinctively raise his arm to protect the vital points. The teeth pierced into the flesh, and the pain instantly spread throughout his body. His visual line began to blur, and he heard a sound of 00 at the ears. As the end, don't be slapped, use the right to use it. Luo Yun bit his teeth tightly, and blood overflowed from the corner of his mouth, but he was hard to open his mouth. He knew that once that permission was used, he might lose more, not just memory, or perhaps his own dignity. However, the demon wolf's teeth were getting deeper and deeper, and the power gradually suppressed his resistance. The darkness in front of him became increasingly heavy. His hands finally reached towards the virtual interface with trembling. Luo Yun's fingers were on the virtual interface, and his shaking could almost hear the sound of his heartbeat. His vision was blurry, blood dripped from the corners of his arms and mouth, and the cold earth smell mixed with the fishy smell of the demon wolf, causing his stomach to swell. The demon wolf's teeth were deeply embedded in his arm, and the pain came like a tide, almost drowning his consciousness. In my ears, Lingling's voice was filled with a hint of anxiety, but he still didn't lose the habit of teasing, since, don't hesitate anymore. If you don't move, you will really become a dinner for these little guys. Close your mouth. Luo Yun pulled out 2 words from his teether, his voice was low and sandy. There was a flash of stubbornness in his eyes. Although his body had reached its limit, the arrogance deep in his heart did not allow him to surrender easily. He was once the endorser standing on the top, killing a bloody path from the boundless world countless times. How could he give up his bottom line just because of several low-level demon wolves? He bit his teeth tightly, held the handle of the iron sword tightly with his other hand, and pulled it hard with all his strength, pulling it out of the soil. The blood flowed down his arms, dyeing the stomp, but his movements did not stop. While the demon wolf had not completely locked his arm, he suddenly stabbed the iron swordsman with his backhand, pointing directly at the demon wolf's eyes. It was a lone bet and a cat, without any fancy, with a determination to kill. The demon wolf let out a low growl, as if he had noticed the danger and instinctively turned his head to avoid it, but Luo Yun's sword was already close at hand. Although the striking tip failed to stab the eyes, it slapped its face hard, tearing a deep wound, and blood sprayed out. The demon wolf suffered a pain and easily bit Luo Yun's arm. He stepped back and took a few steps, causing a low furious bird. Luo Yun took the opportunity to slap, knelt on his knees, gasping heavily. His left arm had almost lost consciousness, and the wound on his shoulder was still bleeding, and his physical strength was exhausted. In the fog, another demon wolf approached, and the red eyes seemed to be invisible in the fog, like a soundless gazing of the grim reaper. The demon wolf, who was just stabbed by him, stood firm again. Although the wound on his face was shocked, its desire to attack seemed to only increase but not decrease. Deadline, your stubbornness is really admirable. Lingling's voice sounded again, and there was a complex emotion in his language. But look at yourself, you'll be free when you stand up, so what are you going to do? The rules are not cheating, it's just a chance to stand up again. Can you not be willing to pay for this price? Luo Yun's breathing was rapid, and countless thoughts flashed through the sea of brain. Price, what price is it? Should I lose more memory, or will my remaining will be swallowed by the system? He didn't know and didn't dare to pay. But the reality in front of him was not enough to think about it. The 2 demon wolves had approached again, and their low growls were rumbling in the mist, like a death-hunting drum. His fingers touched the virtual interface again, and the cold touch made his heart suddenly shrink. At this moment, a deep forest suddenly came a deeper forest, like the sound of some giant creature stomping on the ground. The fog was moved by a certain force and began to swell violently, and even the trees around it shook slightly. The 2 demon wolves seemed to have noticed the difference, and they moved for a while, their ears buzzed, and they looked vigilantly in the direction where the sound came. Luo Yun raised his eyebrows, stood up with a strong grip, his eyes passed through the fog, and tried to see the source of the sound clearly. His heartbeat couldn't help but speed up, and an ominous premonition appeared in the sea of his brain. In the forest of the test, the low-level demon wolf has already dealt with. If there is another stronger existence, he may not even have the chance to escape. Lingling, what's going on? Luo Yun asked in a low voice, with a sense of anxiety in his voice. His hands remained on the virtual interface and were ready to make decisions at any time. Oh! It seems that some big guys have been attracted. There was a burst of excitement in Ling Ling's language, as if he was not worried about Luo Yun's safety at all. There is not only a small character like the demon wolf in the trial forest. The smell of blood will lead to more dangerous existences. The endorser, it's not the time to show off his strength. Do you want me to help you see what level this new guy is? Luo Yun bit his teeth tightly and did not answer. His eyes came back to the demon wolf in the deep smoke, trying to judge the current situation. The two demon wolves had locked him again, and they certainly did not intend to let go of this pet, and the sound of the birds deep in the forest was getting closer and closer, and they could even feel the slight vibrations coming from the ground. Suddenly, a huge black shadow flashed through the fog. With a low roar, the tree was knocked by a huge force, making a harsh cracking sound. Luo Yun's pupils suddenly shrank, and his heart seemed to be tightened. He could not see the whole picture of the black shadow, but only judging by physical shape and atmosphere, this was definitely not the existence he could fight against now. The endorsement, there is not much time left. Zero's voice sounded again, carrying an unquestionable coldness. You only have a few seconds to decide whether to fight, escape, or use. Luo Yun held the iron sword tightly, and the blood was pulled out of his fingers. His eyes were staring at the black shadow in the mist, his ears were the roar of the demon wolf and the sound of the giant's approaching footsteps. At this moment, the black shadow suddenly let out a deafening roar, and the fog was torn apart by a strong airflow, revealing a giant claw of a snail, and slapped straight in his direction. The giant claws broke through the fog and slapped Luo Yun with an unrivaled threat, and even a sharp sound came from the air. Luo Yun's pupils suddenly collapsed, and he almost instinctively turned to the side. The soil was rising, and the cold ground hit his wound, making him hum in pain. The giant claw hit his position just now, and the ground was instantly sunken, and cracks spread around like spider nets. Several thick trees were directly slapped, and the wood chips were scattered. Luo Yun rolled a few times, reluctantly squeezing his body with the iron blade, and his breathing was as heavy as a broken wind box. His left arm was completely numb, and every action seemed to tear his nerves. Blood flowed down his shoulders, and a dazzling red burst into the soil. He looked up and the huge black shadow in the fog slowly revealed part of the silhouette. It was a huge creature, and the body covered with a piece of slim viewed in the fog. The red eyes were like two flaming lights, emitting a heart-pounding cold light. This is, what monster? Luo Yun bit his teeth and his voice was so low that he could hardly hear it. His flying speed in the sea of his brain was through various possibilities, but no matter what, the level of this thing is definitely beyond his current range of abilities. The two demon wolves next to them seemed to feel the pressure, and they felt uneasy low, and their bodies retreated slightly, but they still had not completely let go of their locks on Luo Yun. Finisher, I have to say, your energy is really good. Zero's voice sounded in his ears, and he brought a glimpse of happiness in his language. This guy is not a regular resident of the Forest of the Trials. He is probably attracted by your bloody smell. According to the system scan, this is a groundbreaker lizard, which is at least above the high level of magic. Its strength and defense are extremely varied, and the only weakness is its slow speed. Of course, the premise is that you can find its weakness. Small talk. Luo Yun growled, his eyes locked in the giant lizard. His fingers were still on the virtual interface, and his heart was almost about to tear himself apart. Using rules to modify the permissions may allow him to gain strength in a short time and reverse the situation, but the unknown price is like a sword hanging on the top, making him unable to make up his mind. The giant lizard let out a low roar, and its thick tail swept suddenly. Several large trees were shaking, and the broken wood flew towards Luo Yun with huge impact. He bit his teeth tightly and hit a piece of block, but the other block hit his back hard. The intense pain made him kneel down a little, a stream of fishy sweetness emerged from his mouth, and blood spilled from the corner of his mouth. Deadline, if you don't make a decision, you won't have the chance to escape. Ling Ling's voice was cold and cold. The earth-breaking lizard will not give you a breath. Now the two demon wolves are still watching the tiger beside him. What are you going to do? Luo Yun's vision was a little blurred, and the roars and heartbeats in his ears intertwined, making his consciousness almost fall into chaos. He lowered his head and glanced at the iron sword in his hand. The blade was covered with blood and soil, and his shaking fingers could hardly hold the handle. His arrogance told him that he could never lower his head to the system, but it was like a heavy rumor, which severely shattered his stubbornness. At this moment, the giant lizard opened its pace again, and its huge body crushed the ground and approached Luo Yun. Each step made the ground shake slightly, and the fog was moved by its air, revealing a huge mouth of the scorpion, and fishy liquid dripped from his teeth. At the same time, a demon wolf seemed to have seized the opportunity, roared and swung from its side to Luo Yun, with a cold light flashing between its minions. "Don't die!" Luo Yun bit his teeth tightly and rushed the iron sword. The blade collided with the demon wolf's claws, making a harsh sound of metal croaking. His arm was numb and his wounds were torn apart again, and blood spurted out. The demon wolf was forced back by the sword, but the other one took advantage of the opportunity to attack from the back, and his sharp claws pointed directly at his back. Luo Yun's heart was tightened, almost instinctively lowering his head to avoid it, and his claws rubbed against his skin and took away a few black hairs. His body has reached its limit, and every action is like the last force that squeezes life. The giant lizard's stomp was getting closer and closer, and the demon wolf's growl was surging around his ears. He knew that he had no way out. 0. Luo Yun's voice was sandy and low, with a hint of reluctance. "If I use my permission, what is the price?" Lingling was silent for a moment, then smiled lightly, and there was a lot of meaning in his speech. "Deadline, is it a little too late to ask this now? But I can tell you that the agency will not kill you immediately, but it will change something, maybe memory, maybe will, or maybe it is part of your most precious thing. What is the specific one? The system will not be well drawn in advance." Luo Yun's eyes darkened, and his fingers trembled slightly on the virtual interface. His eyes swept over the approaching lizard and demon wolf, and his former self appeared in the sea of brains, the fearless Endinger standing on the top. He was unwilling to fall down just now, and he was even more unwilling to become a puppet of the system, but the absolute situation in front of him could not allow him to feel any hesitation. The giant lizard suddenly roared, and its huge claws raised again, and slapped at Luo Yun with the air of destroying the sky and land. At the same time, a demon wolf rushed from the side, and the red eyes were filled with bloodthirsty crazy. Luo Yun's pupils suddenly shrank, and his fingers finally touched the confirmation key on the virtual interface. A cold system prompt sound came up around his ears. "The rule modification permission is about to start. Please confirm whether it is implemented." His heart seemed to be tightened, and time seemed to be frozen at this moment. The shadow of the giant claws had already covered his whole body, the demon wolf's sharp claws were close at hand, and his fingers were shaking slightly on the confirmation key. Luo Yun's fingers stopped on the virtual interface, and for only a moment, it seemed like a long time had passed. His heartbeat was rushing around his ears, the claws of the giant lizard were almost swallowing him, and the smell of the demon wolf was already coming. Sweat mixed with blood slid across his extreme angles and dripped onto the muddy ground, making a slight sound. His eyes flashed through, but it was replaced by a trace of determination. "Acknowledge it." His voice was low and sandy, almost drowned by the roar of the giant lizard. The fingers pressed down suddenly, and a faint blue light came out from the virtual interface, which disappeared quickly. A cold system prompt sounded in his brain. "The rule modification permission has been activated, and the price will be settled in a subsequent manner. Currently, the environmental regulations are adjusted, the power increase will take effect, and the duration is 30 seconds. Luo Yun's pupils suddenly shrank, and then a hot energy burst out from his chest and instantly flowed throughout his body. His muscles were tight, and his numb left arm actually recovered his consciousness. His hands holding the iron sword no longer trembled, and even the pain in his back was forced by some force. His breathing became flat and his vision changed from blur to clarity, as if he had completely dispelled his fetal bones. "This is..." Luo Yun lowered his head and looked at his two hands. The iron blade reflected his slightly silly face. He could feel the power of rushing inside his body, like a long-sleeping wild beast awakened, and every inch of his muscles was roaring. He had no time to think about it. The giant lizard's claws were already close at hand, and he slapped it hard with the might of crushing everything. "Roll open!" Luo Yun shouted angrily, and his body moved sharply, leaving a shadow almost at a speed. The giant claws hit the ground, and the soil was filled with all the soil, but this time, he was not shaken by the shock wave, but stood firmly at his feet. At the same time, the demon wolf on the side rushed towards his throat, pointing his sharp claws straight at his throat. Luo Yun snorted coldly, and the iron sword suddenly sniffed, and the sword light was like a rainbow, colliding with the demon wolf's claws, sparking all 4 times. The demon wolf let out a slight wailing sound, and was directly slashed by the air, hitting a large tree, and the sound of the tree broke. Another demon wolf saw it, growled and tried to steal the picture from behind, but Luo Yun seemed to have expected its action long ago, and he stabbed it out with his backhand, and the tip of the demon wolf's neck accurately. The blood spurted out, and the demon wolf stabbed for a few times, and finally lost its life. Luo Yun pulled out the iron blade, and the blood on the blade emitted a pungent fishy smell in the mist. His eyes were unusually cold, as if the life and death battle just happened was just a trivial matter. "The endorsement is good." 00's voice sounded again, with a slight praise in his language. "But don't be too excited too early. The strength increase is only 30 seconds, and now it has been 10 seconds. The groundbreaking lizard is not comparable to those 2 little wolves. You'd better catch it." Luo Yun bit his teeth tightly and his eyes closed the giant lizard that was far away. The big body moved slowly in the fog, and the red eyes stared at him, as if a treasure that could not be escaped. Its tail swept again, carrying a wild wind, and several large trees were uprooted and smashed towards Luo Yun. Luo Yun took a deep breath, his body flashed, easily avoiding the flying slash, and kept walking, rushing straight to the giant lizard. "Since speed is your weakness, then try this." Luo Yun growled, and suddenly exerted force under his feet. The soil was stepped into a deep pit, and the whole person rushed towards the giant lizard like an arrow leaving the string. His iron sword burst out a cold light in the mist, pointing to a soft area on the abdomen of the giant lizard that was not covered by the pelvis. That was the only breaking point he had just noticed. The giant lizard let out a deafening roar, and its huge claws tried to cut it off, but its movement seemed to be slow releasing in Luo Yun's eyes, and it was easy to hide from one side of him. The iron blade pierced into the abdomen of the giant lizard, and blood poured out like a spring, and the fishy smell spread out. Luo Yun bit his teeth tightly and tried to pull out the iron blade, but the lizard's muscles suddenly retracted, and the blade was stuck tightly. Although his power has increased, it is still somewhat insufficient compared to this high-level magician. The giant lizard's red eyes flashed with violent slightness, and its huge head suddenly lowered, its huge mouth opened, and it bit Luo Yun hard. "Die!" Luo Yun lowered his curse and opened the handle of the sword. He suddenly grabbed the top of the giant lizard with both hands, trying to stop it from merging. The pointed teeth were only a few inches from his arm, and the smelly breath almost suffocated him. His arms were shaking, and the time of his strength was increasing was passing by. The energy in his body began to become unstable, the veins at the altitude swelled up, and sweat slid down his face. "The finale has 5 seconds. 00's voice was almost ruthless. "If you don't want to turn into this guy's lunch, you'd better think about it." Luo Yun's eyes flashed, and the flying speed in the sea of brain flashed through various possibilities. He knew that after the increased time, he would return to death, and maybe even worse. The giant lizard's huge mouth gradually collapsed, and his arms were already numb, and his bones seemed to be crushed at any time. At this moment, he glanced at the pierced wound on the lizard's abdomen, and blood was still flowing out, revealing the fragile corpus inside. "Try it." Luo Yun bit his teeth tightly, suddenly opened his hand, letting his huge mouth press closer. At the same time, the other hand pulled out a short dagger from his waist and stabbed it hard into the wound. The dagger didn't get into flesh and blood, making a tear-tingling sound. The giant lizard let out a painful roar, its body trembled violently, and the power of its huge mouth instantly weakened. Luo Yun took the opportunity to retreat, pulled aside, covered in mud and blood, and his breath was as heavy as if he was about to tear his chest. His visual line was a little blurred, the increase in his body was rapidly fading, and the dramatic fatigue was coming like a tide. The roar of the giant lizard spread across the forest, and with endless anger, it turned over suddenly, and its huge tail was slammed towards Luo Yun, so fast that it even made the air burst out with sharp blasts. Luo Yun raised his head reluctantly, his pupils suddenly shrank, and the shadow of his tail had already covered his whole body. He tried to move, but his body was as heavy as a penis, and he couldn't even lift a finger. Just as there were thousands of hairs, Zero's voice suddenly rose, and there was a rare rush in his language, the ending, "Please hide. Now." Luo Yun's ears resounded with a quick warning sound, and the remaining instinct in his brain made him swing his last force and suddenly slam to the side. The giant lizard's tail was smashed down with a thunderous force. The soil was lifted up several meters high, and a cracked hole broke on the ground, which shocked Luo Yun's inner body seemed to be shifting. He rolled out a few meters away, covered in mud and sand, his chest was undulating, and his ears were buzzing, and he could hardly hear the sounds around him. In the fog, the giant lizard's red eyes flashed with violent light, and the attack of its tail fell to make it even more manic. It growled, its big body slowly turned, and the wound on its abdomen was still bleeding, and every step it took made the ground tremble. Luo Yun lay in the mud, his arms numb as if he was not the only one who belonged to him. The time when his strength increased was exhausted, the energy in his body disappeared like a tide, leaving only the uneven fatigue and biting pain. His visual line gradually became blurry, and the silhouette of the giant lizard began to become hazy. "Captain, can you still move?" Zero's voice rose in the brain, still calm, but the speed of language was obviously faster. "The increased price is about to be settled, and you may fall into a short and weak state next. The giant lizard was seriously injured, but it is not dead yet, and you must fight for time." "When the fight is time?" Luo Yun's voice was so hard that he could not hear clearly, and a bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. He reluctantly lifted his upper body, pressed his palms on the soil, his fingertips trembled, and he didn't even have the strength to clench his fists. His eyes swept around, the iron blade was still stuck on the abdomen of the giant lizard, and the dagger was also stuck in the mud that was far away, without any weapons on his body. He knew that even if he was in a state of affairs, not to mention counterattack, even standing up was a problem. The giant lizard's roar sounded again. It seemed to notice Luo Yun's weakness. Its huge claws were raised and its watch was pressing towards him like a hill. The claws were filled with cold light, and the air was filled with the breath of death. Luo Yun bit his teeth and flew rapidly in the sea of brain. He tried to find a cell phone. He suddenly glanced at a large slanted tree that was not far away, with bare roots and a narrow depression formed underneath, which could barely accommodate a person. "I can only catch a hand," Luo Yun murmured, biting his tongue hard, and the pain made his mind a little clearer. He crawled towards the big tree with all his strength. Every inch of his movement seemed to tear his muscles, sweat mixed with blood dripping on the soil, leaving spots. The giant lizard's claws were smashed down hard, and the soil was 4 cushions, only half a meter away from Luo Yun. The impact of the wave caused a few more blood marks on his back. He gasped, and finally climbed under the tree roots, barely sucking into the narrow sag. The shade of the tree roots made the giant lizard unable to attack directly for a while, but its claws began to dig wildly, soil and gravel kept falling, and the sunken space became smaller and smaller. Luo Yun curled up inside, feeling the drama's violent vibration, his heart beats like a drum, and his brain was unusually cold. "Zero, how serious will the price settlement be?" His voice was low, with a difficult fatigue to cover up. "The price of the rules modified by the ending is different from the person, but with your current body condition, it is very likely to enter a short conscious blur." Zero's voice was calm and almost mechanical. "However, I detected that your willpower exceeded expectations, or may reduce some of the impact. It is recommended that you adjust your breathing, concentrate and fight to find a way to remove yourself before the price arrives. Luo Yun closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to calm the chaotic thoughts down. The digging sound of the giant lizard is not absolutely right in the ears, and the roots of the tree emit a tummy cracking sound that may collapse at any time. His palm pressed on the soil inadvertently, and suddenly he touched an ice-like object. His fingertips were slight and his eyes suddenly opened. It was a piece of metal fragment half buried in the soil, with irregular shape, but the edges were enough to break the skin. This is... Luo Yun's pupils slightly shrank, and a burst of hope rose in his heart. He carefully dug out the fragments and held them in his palms. Although his palms were shaking so hard that they could hardly hold them, the fragments were undoubtedly his only weapon now. He quickly swept around and tried to make a plan. The wound on the lizard's abdomen is its biggest weakness. If it can be given another blow, it may be possible to get the time to escape. At this moment, a fierce dizziness suddenly came. Luo Yun's vision suddenly turned black, and something seemed to be forced to be pulled away from the sea of brain, and his body trembled uncontrollably. His consciousness began to blur, the sounds around his ears became far and distorted, and the roar of the giant lizard seemed to be coming from another world. The finale, the price settlement starts. Hold on. Ling Ling's voice started in the brain, and a wave of words was brought for the first time. Luo Yun bit his teeth tightly, his nails were deeply embedded in his palm, and he tried to keep awake with the pain. His consciousness slammed in the darkness, as if he was dragged into a purplish without any edge, but the icy touch of the metal fragments in his hand became his only liability. At this moment, a huge sound came from above the tree roots, and the soil and gravel fell like rain. The lizard's claws finally broke through the final barrier. The red eyes stared at him through the cracks, full of bloodthirsty desire. Luo Yun's vision swayed in the darkness, and the red eyes of the giant lizard ape were like two bulging ghost fires, piercing through the cracks and stabbing his heart. The soil and gravel kept sliding down, and the narrow and sunken space was almost compressed to an extreme limit. The air was filled with the damp smell of mud and the urgency of death. His palms held the sharp metal fragments, and his fingers turned white with force. Although every cell in his body was screaming fatigue and pain, his will was like a faint flame, dragging and refusing to extinguish it. Finder, your consciousness is declining. If you don't act immediately, your survival probability will drop to less than 5%. Zero's voice sounded in the brain, and the verb was still cold, but the hint revealed a hurricane. The digging speed of the giant lizard is accelerating, and you are expected to be fully exposed within 30 seconds. It is recommended to use the debris for the last hit, with the target still on the abdominal wound. 30 seconds. Luo Yun's lips trembled slightly, and his voice was so low that he could hardly hear it. He reluctantly lifted up half of his body and calmed himself against the slaughter of the tree roots. The glare in the sea of brain came wave after wave like a tide, making him almost unconscious every time. The impact of the agency settlement is more terrifying than he thought. Every inch of the muscles in his body feels like they have been torn and reorganized, and the action of raising his hand is unusually difficult. The giant lizard's claws were smashed down again, and the last sound of sorrow came out from the roots, breaking and opening. Luo Yun's body was exposed to the other party's vision, and the cold fog came over, mixing with the fishy smell of the giant lizard. He could clearly see the pieces on the big body. Each piece was as hard as iron armor, only the wound on his abdomen that was torn by the iron blade was still sucking out dark red blood, which looked particularly fragile. Just now, Luo Yun bit his teeth tightly, and forced the confusion in his subconscious mind. He held the metal fragments tightly with both hands, focusing only the remaining force on this blow. His video line locked the lizard's belly, waiting for a perfect time. The giant lizard seemed to feel his resistance, and with a low growl, the huge head suddenly stumbled down, and its bloody mouth opened, revealing its sharp fangs, and rushed towards him. At this moment of life and death, Luo Yun suddenly rolled to one side. The soil was rising, and the giant lizard's teeth rubbed against his shoulders, tearing a deep wound to the bone. The drama pain made his mind clear a little. He couldn't touch his bloody shoulders. taking advantage of the moment when the giant lizard attacked and suddenly stabbed the metal fragments in his hand into the wound on the other party's abdomen. The broken pieces tear open the broken pieces, and the blood blew out like a spring, filling Luo Yun's face. The giant lizard let out a roar that shook violently, and its huge tail swung wildly, causing a crazy wind to scatter the surrounding soil and gravel. Luo Yun was directly overturned by the shock wave and fell heavily on the ground a few meters away. His chest was sank and he could hardly breathe. His palms were still tightly holding metal fragments, which were covered with the blood of the giant lizard, which was sticky and warm. Descendant, attack is effective. The life symbol of the giant lizard is declining rapidly, but its violent state may last for several seconds. It is recommended to evacuate immediately. 00's voice burst into a rapid voice, carrying a rare excitement. Luo Yun gasped heavily, and reluctantly got up, his eyes swept towards the giant lizard that was not far away. The wound on its abdomen has doubled, and blood flows like a waterfall, dyeing the soil under its feet, but its red eyes are still full of killing, and its huge body is shattered and unwilling to fall. Luo Yun knew that even if this monster died, it would be enough to drag him into the ground at the last moment. He bit his teeth tightly, dragged his almost numb legs, and ran towards the deep fog. Every step is like stepping on the tip of a knife, and the wound on the shoulder is constantly bleeding, leaving behind a string of red feet. His consciousness began to blur again, and the post-mortem symptoms of price settlement were like a skew, making his vision clear and distorted. Behind him, the roar of the giant lizard became more and more remote, but the heavy footsteps were still clearly visible, as if they would catch up with them any time. The endorser, detecting unknown energy waves ahead, suggesting to roam, but at your current speed, you will most likely be caught up by the giant lizard. 00's voice sounded in the brain, and a silly hesitation came out of his language, or, you can try to approach the source of energy waves, or maybe find new variables. Variable. Luo Yun murmured, and a bitter smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. His eyes penetrated the fog, and he saw a faint light ahead feeling hidden in the fog, like some unusual energy gathering point. He didn't know what it was, but he just told him that this might be his only way to live. At this moment, the ground behind him suddenly shook violently, the soil was lifted up several meters high, and the roar of the giant lizard rolled over like thunder. Obviously it had locked his position. Luo Yun's heart was tightened and he accelerated toward the group of light, while holding the metal fragments tightly in his hand, ready to face unknown challenges. The fog became more and more dense, and his figure was gradually swallowed up, and the light of the group suddenly flashed, as if calling him forward. The fog is like a thick curtain, wrapping Luo Yun's figure in full. Every step he took was heavy and difficult, the wound on his shoulder burned like flames, and blood dripped onto the soil with his arms, making a slight sound. Behind him, although the roar of the giant lizard had gone far, the low vibration still came through the ground, as if reminding him that the shadow of death had not really left. His consciousness was swayed in fatigue and pain, and his vision was blurred when it was wild, and was pulled back by the faint light ahead. Deadline: your life symptoms are falling rapidly and your heart rate is abnormal. It is recommended to find shelter immediately, otherwise you will lose your ability to move within 3 minutes. 00's voice sounded in the brain, and his speech was more rapid than ever before, even with a slight irritation that was difficult to detect. The energy wave source is only 50 meters away, but its nature cannot be determined, and there may be extremely high risks. River. Luo Yun said in a low voice, and a weak smile came out of the corner of his mouth. His legs were as heavy as a penis, and every step required all his energy to take. But he knew that stopping meant giving up, and no matter what was ahead, he had to take this last try. His eyes closed the group's hidden light. In the fog, it looked like a lonely light, both like hope and some unknown trap. The soil under the feet gradually became soft, and there was a strange smell in the air, like the burning smell of metal and current interaction. Luo Yun's skin felt a slight tingling pain, as if invisible energy was flowing around. His heartbeat accelerated unconsciously, and his palm holding the metal fragments trembled slightly, not because of fear, but because of some instinctive warning. the endorsement detects a faint electromagnetic interference, and the energy wave source is releasing unstable signals. It is recommended to keep a distance. Zero's voice suddenly changed, as if it was subjected to some kind of interference. Warning. System. Maybe. Before the voice fell, Zero's voice stopped abruptly, replaced by a harsh and quiet noise, which echoed sharply in the Luo Yun's brain. Zero-ling? Luo Yun shouted in a low voice, and there was a panic in his voice. He has never encountered such a situation, and Lingling has always been his pillar. No matter how dangerous the situation is, the cold sound can always give him the most precise guidance. However, at this moment, Lian Lingling was cut off from contact, which made an unprecedented anxiety in his heart. In the fog, the group of lights suddenly became brighter, as if responding to his arrival. Luo Yun bit his teeth tightly, and under the pressure of his inner anxiety, dragging his almost numb body forward. As the distance narrowed, he finally saw the true face of the group of light. It was not a single light, but an energy vortex floating in the air, about 1 meter straight, and the surrounding mist was sucked in by it, forming a tiny whirlwind. The center of the vortex flashed with a blue-white arc, making a low buzzing sound, like some ancient and dangerous machine moving. Luo Yun stopped and stood about 5 meters away from the vortex, panting and looking at the strange scene in front of him. His intuition told him that this thing was absolutely unsimplified. It could be an unknown technological failure or a fatal trap. But he didn't choose, and the giant lizard behind him might catch up at any time, and his body was already extremely limited. No matter what you are. Luo Yun murmured in a low voice, his voice calming down, at least give me a chance to survive. He took a deep breath, moved his shaking arms, held the metal fragments tightly in his hand, and then approached the vortex. With each step, the electromagnetic interference around him became stronger and stronger. His skin felt more and more obvious stinging, and even his hair was slightly raised, as if it was surrounded by a quiet electric power. Just as he was only 2 meters away from the vortex, a dazzling blue light suddenly burst out from the center of the vortex, accompanied by a sharp sound of turtle, as if some kind of energy was instantly released. Luo Yun instinctively raised his arms to cover his eyes, but the next moment, a powerful suction force exploded from the vortex, pulling him forward violently. His feet stumbled, his body almost lost balance, and even the metal fragments in his hand were almost wiped out. Diet! Luo Yun gritted his teeth and roared, trying to calm his body, but the suction was so strong that it was suffocating, as if he was about to swallow him in. He reluctantly inserted metal fragments into the ground, trying to resist with the force, but found that the soil on the ground was also being sucked into the whirlpool, and even the fragments began to shake violently, making a harsh friction sound. At the same time, a shocking roar suddenly came from the fog behind him, and the giant lizard's big figure was almost visible, and the ape's red eyes flashed in the fog, like 2 groups of burning flames. Its speed was faster than Luo Yun expected. Although the wound on his abdomen was still bleeding, it seemed to have no pain in its violent state, and it rushed in with the help of destroying everything. Luo Yun's heartbeat was almost about to penetrate his chest. He turned around and looked at the giant lizard behind him, then looked at the energy vortex in front of him. 2 extremes were intertwined in front of him, forcing him to make an almost impossible decision. Resist the suction force and face the fatal blow of the giant lizard, or give up the resistance and let Yuzue swallow him without catching the unknown result. The Enders, the signal is restored, it's immediately. Lingling's voice suddenly broke out at this moment, but before he could finish it, a blue arc shot out from the vortex, hitting Luo Yun's chest. He could only feel a sensation of numbness spread from his chest to his whole body, and his body involuntarily stiffened, and even the metal fragments in his hand flew out and quickly swept towards the center of the vortex. And at this moment, the giant lizard's giant claws poked out from the fog and slapped him hard with a fishy wind. The giant lizard's giant claws were pressed down like a hill, and the air was torn apart, making a sharp sound. Luo Yun's whole body was numb, and the arc in his chest made his muscles stiff as a stone, and he couldn't even exert the force of moving a millimeter. His eyes were slight, as the claws filled with film approached him, and the shadow of death almost swallowed him up for this moment. My heart was beating wildly, and my blood seemed to solidify, and I could not do anything. However, just as the claws were about to touch his head, the suction force from the energy vortex suddenly increased, as if an invisible hand suddenly grabbed his body. Luo Yun could only feel dizzy, and the whole person was pulled towards the center of the vortex. The giant lizard's claws barely wiped his back, bringing a biting cold wind, but failed to hit it. He could even hear the giant lizard's angry roar back in his ears, shaking so hard that the fog was trembling. What a ghost thing is this? Luo Yun gritted his teeth and growled, and his voice continued as the suction pulled. He tried to twist his head and see clearly what was happening behind him, but his body was completely out of control and could only let the vortex drag him towards the core of the blue-white arc. His vision was blurred, and the wound on his shoulders was torn again due to the dramatic movement. The blood was sucked into the vortex like a fine line and disappeared into the endless light. The metal fragments that had been removed before had been sucked into the vortex, and were floating in the center at this moment, rotating violently, and the surface was ripped by an arc, emitting dazzling sparks. Luo Yun's eyes closed the fragments tightly, and an ominous premonition flashed in the sea of brain. This whirlpool seemed to be devouring everything, whether it was soil, fog, or the items in his hands, or even, maybe himself. The Enders, system, signal interference, try to reconnect. Zero's voice continued to sound again, like a faint echo coming from the extreme distance, with each word covered with harsh and static noise. Luo Yun felt nervous, and felt panic in his heart, and shouted in a low voice, "Lingling! Tell me what this is. How do I take it off?" But only a stronger static noise answered him, and then, Zero's voice disappeared completely, as if it was cut off by some invisible force. Luo Yun bit his teeth tightly, and his mind was pricked in pain and numbness. He knew that he could rely on now. The suction of the vortex became stronger and his body was completely empty, less than 1 meter away from the core. The arc was walking around like a snake, and it was rubbing his skin from time to time, causing a stinging pain. His hair was pulled up by calm electricity, and even small electric light came out from his skin, as if it was poured into his body by some kind of energy. He could feel that his vitality was being withdrawn a little, and his mind gradually became blurred, as if he would fall into the darkness at any time. No. I can't just fall down. Luo Yun bit his lower lip and woke himself up with the pain. He tried to stretch out his arms and grab anything that could stabilize his body, but there was only an invisible flow of energy around him, and he had no force at all. His eyes swept toward the metal fragment in the center of the vortex again, and a crazy thought suddenly flashed through his brain. If he could catch that fragment, perhaps he could use its weight and rotation to change his junction and remove this dead suction. As soon as this idea came out, Luo Yun stopped silly. He exercises the remaining consciousness, concentrates all his attention, and waits for his body to be sucked into the best position. Finally, when he was only half a meter away from the fragments, he gritted his teeth suddenly, and his right arm was not under the numbness of the sarcastic drama, and he rushed towards the fragments hard. His fingertips barely touched the cold edge of the debris, but the next moment, a thick arc of electric burst out from the vortex core, hitting his arm. Ah! Luo Yun let out a painful growl, his arms shrinking in an instant as if they were scorching by flames. But this blow also slightly shifted his body's trunk. He was thrown toward the edge of the vortex without reducing his speed. He could feel that the suction was weakening, but at the same time, a more dangerous wave of energy surged from the depths of the vortex, like a sign of some kind of about to explode. Behind him, the roar of the giant lizard approached again, and the huge figure seemed to be invisible in the fog, as if it had not given up and chased. Luo Yun's vision became darker and darker, and his mind was as storm as wind, and it might be extinguished at any time. He knew that he had only one last chance to get rid of the vortex and be swallowed up. Suddenly, the light in the center of the vortex flashed suddenly, and the metal fragments were blown out by some force, flying towards Luo Yun at high speed. His pupils suddenly shrank, and he instinctively leaned to avoid it, but the speed of the fragments was astonishing as the sharp edge pointed directly into his chest. Luo Yun's pupils almost shrank a little at that moment, and the time seemed to be infinitely stretched. The sharp edges of metal fragments flashed with cold light under the wrapping of the arc, and swirled at high speed and directly pressed his chest. He wanted to hide, but found that his body had been killed by the vortex suction, and he didn't even have any force to twist. The shadow of death was once again covered, colder and more ruthless than the claws of the giant lizard. "No. I can't fall down." Luo Yun growled in his heart, and his mind was blurred, a flame ignited. He forced himself to focus his last attention, and suddenly flashed the maintainer mode startup code in the sea of brain that was his only trump card in the Tower War and the most dangerous bet. Every time he uses it, he will use memory fragments as a price, and may even erase his existence. System. Activate. Main tenant mode. Code, restart at 0. Luo Yun used only the remaining conscious low words, and his voice was almost swallowed by the whirlwind's whirlwind. But the next moment, a cold mechanical sound echoed in his brain. "The authority is confirmed, the maintenance mode is activated, the memory fragment is being extracted. Warning, this operation will cause the core data to be destroyed. Will it continue?" "Stay." Luo Yun almost yelled out these two words with all his strength. His vision was instantly covered by a layer of white light, as if the whole world was formatted, and the whirlwind suction, the roar of the giant lizard, and the threat of metal fragments were all stopped at this moment. Time seemed to be pressed by an invisible hand to the pause key, and the jump of the arc was frozen in mid-air. Luo Yun's consciousness was pulled into a virtual space without any side, surrounded by countless floating streams, like a broken galaxy. He lowered his head and saw that his hands were gradually becoming transparent, and the memory fragments were moving away from his body like light. It was the smile of fighting against Xiaoli, the anger when he fought against Bai Qi, and the warmth that Lingling pointed lightly in his ears for the first time. These fragments left him one by one, turning into data flow and entering the core of the vortex. "The price, it's really here." Luo Yun smiled bitterly, his voice so weak that he could hardly hear it. He could feel that his existence was being wiped out a little, but at the same time, the vortex energy wave began to flatten, and the metal fragments were decomposed by invisible forces, turning into countless small spots of light and dissipating into the air. The figure of the giant lizard also gradually disintegrated in a static state, as if it had been erased by some rules. The Ender's system detected an abnormal data flow. The core crash area has been locked, and it started to format. The mechanical sound rose again, cold and heartless. Luo Yun's consciousness became increasingly blurred. He knew that this was the last moment. He chose to use himself as the formatting core, integrate himself into the collapsed area of the system, and use his own existence to repair the cracks in the tower, and prevent the final integration of reality and virtuality. Xiaoli. Bai Qi. Lingling. "I'm sorry." Luo Yun murmured softly, and his transparent figure gradually turned into a group of glimmers, blending into the core of the vortex. At that moment, the vortex burst out with a dazzling white light, which then quickly retracted and turned into a tiny spot of light, disappearing at the top of the tower. The whole space fell into silence, the fog dissipated, revealing a broken ruin. Time flies. After several months. Outside the site of the tower, Xiaoli stood alone in front of a huge stone tablet, blowing her long hair, bringing a chill of coldness. In her hand, she held a broken piece of metal, the only dead body found when the tower collapsed. The surface of the fragments is full of detailed patterns, like some ancient data code. "Luo Yun, you really did." Xiaoli's voice was low and choked, and a drop of water slid down the corner of her eyes. She raised her head and looked at the ever-returning sky. The boundary between the tower and the reality has been redivided, and the trapped players woke up and the world returned to its original trunk. However, the figure who once fought with her will never come back. Bai Qi stood nowhere, silently watching Xiaoli. His eyes were complicated, with a burst of guilt and reluctance. Finally, he whispered lightly and turned away without saying a word. The era of the Tower War is over and they each have lost too much. Just as Xiaoli was about to bury the metal fragments into the soil, a slight quiet noise suddenly came out of the fragments. Later, a familiar but somewhat unfamiliar voice suddenly began to sound. "The upgrade has been completed. Next time, don't restart again." Xiali was stunned and the fragments in her hand almost slid off. She widened her eyes and the water poured out again, carrying a faint smile. Luo Yun, is it you? The fragments didn't make any sound, and they lay quietly in her palm, like the final farewell or some faint promise. Xiali held the fragment tightly, put it on her chest, closed her eyes, and her ears seemed to sound the boy again with the same stubbornness and warmth as ever. The wind blows over the site and brings a new life. The narrative of the Tower War may have ended, but the guardianship and devotion will be forever engraved on this land.